Welcome to the Women's Football Show here on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. I'm Kerry Pollock, joined here with Alison as always, and our special guest this week, I'm pleased to say, is Managing Director of the SWPL, Fiona McIntyre. Lovely to have you here, Fiona. First of all, before we get into all the nitty gritty, tell us, what's a day in the life look like as Manager Director?
Well, that's a good question. A day in the life can be very different, and I think some days it's the exciting things that everyone sees, you know, like when you're launching the season and there's press events or you're bringing in new sponsors, so there's the sort of shiny things, I call it, that people see. And then there's a day-to-day making sure we manage the staff team and we've got fixtures and referees, and there's a lot of firefighting behind the scenes, just dealing with challenges because we're working with clubs that don't all own their stadiums and aren't all full-time, so there's a lot of sort of back and forth with clubs making sure that we're organised for the weekend ahead.
Just take you back to the end of last season then, that was pretty hectic, the top three going for it right till the death. Tell us about that day, how hectic was that going back and forward to the different stadiums?
The day itself actually was okay because we'd planned for it. The week before it was quite chaotic because there was so many permutations. I've got to thank the person that did the fixtures in our office because at least the three teams were in sort of Glasgow and driving distance. Yeah. I'm not sure I fancy a helicopter if one of them had been up in Aberdeen or something. It was just an exciting, fun day. I think the buzz, you could really sense that everyone was talking about the SWPL and women's football, and that's people that maybe sometimes aren't really that interested in women's football. It just captured everyone's imagination, and it was just a fun, exciting day. And obviously we got that drama that I guess the neutrals were all hoping for, that sort of final twist in the last minute of the game, so it was really exciting.
Obviously the top three kind of dominate the headlines, particularly when it is so tight and so dramatic, but it's part of your remit then to make sure that there's a light shone in all the clubs in the league and it's not just attention's hogged, as inevitably as it is. We see it also replicated in the men's league, but also that everyone is getting a bit of coverage.
Definitely, and that's our role. We understand the press partners and media partners, they're going to focus on the top end or the bottom end or where the drama is on any particular weekend, and that part of the season it was Rangers, Celtic and Glasgow City, but our role is to make sure that as many teams as possible get that moment. You were at the league launch and it was very much all in, 20 clubs were there, and we did some activities that made sure we had content for our channels, for all the clubs, and we share that with the press, so we try and do what we can to make sure everyone gets their moment. You know, that's something I think is really important because we understand that naturally the mainstream media will gravitate to some of the bigger clubs and the bigger stories, but we've now got like SWPL 2 highlights on our YouTube channel, and if we can build that audience and show others as an audience for it, then you hope in time that more and more of the mainstream broadcasters will pick up on the sort of wider stories that are going on.
And just in terms of the bigger ambition, how do you top last season when you think of the intrigue and, you know, breaking the domestic attendance 3 times and setting a new record for the Scottish Women's Cup final, and you've brought a sponsor in for that tournament now too, but how do you top last season, and what's the ultimate ambition of your job? Where do you want to take it?
I think last season was unique. We'll never do as much in such a short space of time as we did last year, and that's because we were building something as it was ongoing. You know, we launched the brand like 5 days from the season starting. We brought in sponsors mid-season, we brought in a match ball partner mid-season. We were building something and with a blank bit of paper. We'll never ever have that opportunity again, so it was really important that we did a lot in that first year and built the foundations. But from my perspective this year going forward, we've got a real strong platform to build from now, so we know we've got a lot of games going to be broadcast on television. We've got some big partners. It's now about using those big partners to try and get our message out wider and further. We can't really control a bit on the pitch, and I'm looking at yesterday's results, it looks like it's going to be tight again at the top. There's nobody running away with it. So we hope that on the pitch it will stay competitive. We can structure the league in such a way with the split that it encourages that real competition towards the end of the season in meaningful games. But away from the pitch, we're still looking to bring in new partners all the time. We're still looking for new investment into the game. This year we've got a new match ball partner, the Puma. First time I've ever had a bespoke designed SWPL ball. And these things seem small, but for players it's really important that we are establishing ourselves as an elite and professional league, and we really differentiate ourselves from amateur football. Back when I played the amateur game and the professional side of the game, it was all one really. There wasn't much differentiating the top league from the lower parts of the competition. So yeah, we've still got loads to do, and I think that's why it's a really exciting role to be in.
And ultimately then would the ambition really be a drive towards a full-time professional setup for the top league?
Ultimately, absolutely. I think if you'd said to a few people even 4 or 5 years ago, the number of professional players, we're now over, I think, about 140 professional players at the last count at the end of last season. that's a phenomenal number compared to where we were even a couple of years ago. You've probably got 3 clubs that would say they're absolutely full time. But you look at the investment going in at Hearts and Hibs, the number of players that are now professional there. Aberdeen have got their first ever full-time head coach, and a lot of work's going on Motherwell. There's just so many clubs that are going about their business the right way and trying to make things better. So our ultimate ambition has to be that it becomes a full-time league, and that those top 3 then have got challengers that are, you know, also full-time clubs.
And sort of one of the big challenges will be to keep home-based players within the league. You look at Emma Watson just going down to Manchester United this week, and you think when you've got really exciting talent coming through, that the league almost needs to try and A, hold on to them for as long as possible, and B, if they are going to bring in money, to bring in transfer fees that then you can reinvest within clubs.
I know, and it's a double-edged sword, because part of it shows how good we are at developing talent. The fact that the English WSL, probably the best league in the world right now, are coming up to Scotland and cherry-picking our talent. It's frustrating, and I think for our clubs it's difficult when there's not the same financial remuneration they would get in the men's game, even in terms of the compensation model not really existing. But the upside and the positive we look at it is also, well, we're developing top talent, and our league is being recognised as one that is delivering talent that's capable of going down south and playing immediately and playing well, and the number of Scottish players doing well down south is unbelievable. So you look at it both ways, but I think there's a number of things. We want our league to be as good as it can be, and we hold on to those players for a little bit longer. But the other side of it's probably more FIFA and UEFA based. How do we create a compensation model that sort of incentivises our clubs to keep investing in that youth development, so that they are bringing through these great players, but at the same time they're either compensated when they leave, or what we hope is they'll stay a little bit longer up in Scotland.
Was that the overall perception when you were at the Champions League final at the end of last season as well, when you've been to conventions? What were people saying about our league in Scotland?
It was interesting, the Champions League, UEFA did an event, and it was specifically with Tier 2 leagues, what they called, which is where we're classed. We're probably towards the top end of the Tier 2 leagues, and your Tier 1 leagues are generally the more professional or established leagues, so your France, Germany, England, and it was really interesting because sitting with a lot of like-minded nations, the exact same challenges that we have, in some ways we were actually further ahead than a lot of them because of the move we made last year under the SPFL and our governance model being pretty secure and certain, and our club's been part of that journey. A lot of them are actually still grappling with where should our league sit. Should it be the Football Association? Should it be independent? Or should we sit alongside the men's professional league? So in some ways we were further ahead on those types of things, but the exact same challenges existed in terms of player movement. But it works both ways, because at the same time our clubs can take some talent from down south and from abroad, and they're not having to pay out the compensation or significant transfer fees. So you can't always look through the narrow lens of the negative. There's actually a lot of benefit as well, and it's a challenge that I wouldn't like to be in charge of at FIFA or UEFA, because how you put valuations on these things, given how quickly the game's grown, and just the difference between the finance and the different leagues, that's not easy. So I understand why it's not moved particularly quickly.
Just on that international level as well, then we recently saw Spain lift the World Cup. Do you feel that the light has been kind of a shed off of their achievement because of the whole Luis Rubiales incident that happened over there?
Yeah, being blunt and candid, yeah, I think it has, and I think that's really sad. And a player winning the World Cup should be the most exciting pinnacle of your career. It should be something that you're celebrating for weeks on end. And when I look back to when England won the Euros and the Lionesses and the reception they got back in England, and it felt like a celebration that went on forever, and those players then became household names, and what they achieved and what they had afterwards was a real celebration and a sort of uniting of a nation. It's so sad for Spain, because they were the best team, and on the day they were fantastic, and the football they played was brilliant, and that's what we should all be speaking about. How do we aspire to get to that level? How good were Spain? Speaking about the individual players, and instead we're focused on an incident that just has no place in football.
It's also become a real circus around it across the weekend. I think it's just evolved to the point now where Rubiales, the latest is his mum's walked in a church and has declared herself on hunger strike till this is resolved. But it really, apart from deflecting from the achievements of the women and what they achieved, the implications for everyone else are interesting too.
It should be a learning point for everyone. It's probably from Spain's perspective an example on how not to handle this kind of situation. The bit I actually found most difficult, the incident itself wasn't easy to watch, but I think in the aftermath they called an extraordinary meeting, and Rubiales stands up and he's very aggressive in his manner, and essentially shouting, "I will not resign," and it came across as a real sort of power play of entitlement, and that for me was actually really difficult to watch, almost harder than the initial incident, and the way they've handled it. Other people are going to have to step in. It doesn't appear like the Spanish FA have got to somewhere you would call a decision or something that's acceptable. FIFA have made some progress and made some steps, but you don't know where it's going to end at this point in time, and this is the kind of thing that should be nipped in the bud really early and dealt with quickly, and Spain just haven't done that at all.
And the interesting thing about that speech was how it was received. You've got very powerful men sitting and applauding that. It sends out a message, I think a cultural message, if you're a woman in that environment and you're trying to change the dynamic, just what you might be up against.
Yeah, and that's not nice to watch. I've been asked this question quite a number of times about my own experience in football, and I can genuinely say I've had really positive experiences generally, and it's actually been a lot of male people working in the game that have been really good advocates of the women's game and of myself, and I've had a positive experience generally in Scottish football. But you only need to look at Infantino before the tournament telling us that we have to pick our fights and our battles, and I find that quite depressing. I think, what are we fighting? Have we not all agreed that women's football is of value and FIFA are supportive and we're all supposed to be working together to make it better? So to be told to pick your fights, it just feels so detached from the reality that we are all living in at the moment. And yeah, it's really just quite sad and disappointing and almost demotivating to see some of the most powerful people in football have that attitude, and to the extent that that's not an attitude behind closed doors. They're willingly making statements like that in public, which tells us we've still got a long way to go.
Do you think as well it might activate a bit of cultural change?
I hope so. I think it should. I think we've all got a responsibility in terms of whether it's players, clubs, people in roles like myself or others, but I also think there's a lot of really good male allies in the game. I think that's important, that we don't tar everyone with that brush, that it's all men in football that have that attitude. It's been a couple of individuals, and those individuals should be treated as such, but they are in positions of authority and organisations which are responsible for the development of football, whether that be in a country or across the world. So you hope that lessons have been learned, but it's still dragging on, certainly on the Rubiales front at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just have a look at back at domestic levels then. Let's have a look at the results from the weekend. Hearts saw Aberdeen 2-0. It was another rampant performance from Celtic, 9-0 against Dundee United. It was a 2-2 draw with Hibernian and Spartans. Motherwell saw Hamilton 4-0. Partick Thistle put 5 past Montrose, and Rangers and Glasgow City. It was a share of the points in a 1-1 draw. Alison, you were at that game at Broadwood on Sunday. Let's have a look to see how you got on.
Good afternoon and welcome to Broadwood this afternoon, where Rangers and Glasgow City will battle it out to see if anyone can get their noses in front in the Scottish Power SWPL. Of course, the last time these teams met was at Ibrox on the final day of the season. An afternoon where 3 teams could have won the title, and Lauren Davison clinched it for City with that dramatic 92nd minute winner. City then go into the game as reigning champions. They have a 100% record after the first 3 games, as do Rangers and as do Celtic. So intriguing here to see who can get their noses in front. Rangers, of course, are much changed from that last day of the season. Joe Potter has taken over from Malky Thompson. City too have brought in a couple of new players. It'll be interesting to see how this one plays out.
Get more kids involved, more of the schools, more of the community, because the only way the girls and kids are going to see what women's football is and be interested in is if they come and participate. And especially with our daughter who's autistic, they really took her under their wings. The players are absolutely fantastic with her.
Last season I went to every single Glasgow City game. It was a journey. It's some of the best football I've seen. It's the first season I followed women's football and I absolutely loved it. And I'm just hooked. So if anyone's ever interested, get out and go to a women's game.
I think it's amazing how Nicola started playing football when she was 6-year-old, and I've been coaching her and looking after her, and just over the last 20 years, in the last 5 years I would say it's come in leaps and bounds.
Rangers 1, Glasgow City 1 finish, a share of the points here at Broadwood. A result that will please Fran Alonso's Celtic side. They kicked off earlier in the day and enjoyed a 9-0 win over Dundee United. A result that means that they go top of the Scottish Power SWPL after the opening 4 games. It was a fairly cagey encounter here between Rangers and City. It came to life. in the second period after a very turgid opening half. However, the opening goal came just 3 minutes after the break when teenager Mia McCauley latched onto a beautiful pass from Kirsty McLean. She held her nerve before calmly dispatching an effort past Lee Gibson in Glasgow City goal. City's response was swift, Lauren Davison deserving credit after she had driven at the Rangers defence before teeing up Brenna Lovren for her first goal for Glasgow City. Rangers will feel that they might have done enough to go on and win it. Substitute Sarah Ewings had an effort cleared off the line when McCauley might have had her second of the afternoon, but it finished here at Broadwood. Rangers 1, Glasgow City 1.
It's tough to say this early on in the season, but you know there's encouraging signs there. I think even with the limited squad that we've got, I think we were by far the better team in my eyes. I don't think I'm being too biased in that point, but I thought we created a lot of chances. I thought we grew into the game, and I thought we looked more assured as the game went on. So yeah, I'm happy that with the performance growing into the game. I'd have liked 3 points, but I'm certainly glad we didn't lose the game.
In terms of the quality within both teams, I think we both came and we tried to play, so it was a nice evenly matched game, but we've obviously made a mistake for their goal, which I'm not best impressed with, so that's something that we'll go and look at, but I was pleased when we were building up and had the ball that we were able to go and make an impression on the game as well.
Yeah, first goal for Brenna Oliveira. Alison, would you say she's going to be a threat going forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think Glasgow City tried a couple of times to get her before they finally brought her in this season. I think she was a bit of a handful at times yesterday. I thought it was an interesting game yesterday. I think overall neither team wanted to lose it. Neither team wanted just to concede any ground this early on. I think both were quite satisfied with a point. I do think Rangers will feel like they might have edged it. Mia McCauley, she's 17, very, very young coming in. She's already got a few goals. She took the first goal particularly well. The second chance that she had was almost a direct replica of that through and goal, and I think just the experience of Lee to come out and she just spread herself and she saved it with her legs. I think as Mia gets up, Joe Potter was actually saying to just off the record there, I had a wee chat with her the minute she came off the pitch, talking about angles, about her body shape and everything. I think on another day, as the season goes on, I think that's the kind of chance that you'll expect her to take and put away. But I think overall, probably a draw just suggested neither team want to give an inch at this stage. It's almost just, if you're not going to come out of it with 3 points, don't come out on the end of the defeat.
Do you agree with that, Fiona, that going forward, the top three, whenever they come head to head, it's going to be a little bit tetchy?
Yeah, I think the way last season finished, along with the margins are so fine, and the fact that we were looking at goal difference at 1 point towards the end of the season, everyone will be trying to make sure they win the other games that they're playing, not against each other, and that won't be easy either. But I think when it comes to playing each other, at this early stage in the season, nobody wants to give up any ground. I think that's a fair point. Yeah. I think as the season goes on, it depends on how the league's shaped up, and you might see some teams really need to win more than others, and the games might shape up slightly differently. But I think early on, nobody wants to lose those games, and probably on balance, it was just about fair. I'd agree with what I watched yesterday. It looked like a draw was probably a fair result.
Yeah, well, Glasgow City, they play Hearts this weekend on Saturday night. Is it important for you that the league is being experimental that way and being flexible to allow that for them to have time for their Champions League schedule?
Yeah, we try and do whatever we can to help the clubs. We're a club-run organisation, so we very much try and speak to the clubs as much as possible. In all levels, we want our teams to be successful in Europe. From their perspective, we want the clubs to do well and represent themselves well. But it does the league and Scottish football no harm as well. If our teams are performing well on the international stage, I think it just adds to the view and the reputation of the SWPL as a league and our clubs. And that helps us attract better talent and hopefully better resource over time as well. So absolutely anything we can do, and credit to Hearts for being accommodating as well. I think you've got to give them credit for recognising the situation.
I think as well, when you see just how the Women's Champions League has changed over recent seasons, you see the attendances last season, that semi-final at Arsenal, it's just mind-blowing to think what they've achieved across the last decade and where attendances have gone, that you think if there's a slice of the pie there to be shared, that you really want your teams to be in and having a bit of it.
Definitely, as a player, you would absolutely want to play at the highest level, and our clubs have never made the group stages yet since it's went into the newer format in the last couple of years. So you hope that this is the year that one of them can get there. And it's no different to men's football in terms of the financial reward. Well, it is different. It's not the exact same amount of finance, but it's the same principle that when you get into the later stages of these tournaments, the financial rewards get greater, and that allows them again to invest into footballing infrastructure, their playing staff, and it all just raises the level of the competition, which is certainly something that we're keen to see.
Such a convoluted process to get into that group stage, though. It's very difficult for both, and I think Celtic's challenge is probably harder because they're going through the non-champions pathway. I think Glasgow City you would expect to see off Shelbourne, but Celtic's a kind of harder challenge against Brøndby next Wednesday night. Wednesday afternoon, sorry.
But again, that's where it's not hugely dissimilar to the men's game at the moment, and that the benefit of being champions is that you are in that champions path, so you'll be playing against the nations who aren't your top nations that immediately go in the champions, so you are playing against sort of similar level of competitor. Whereas if you're not in the champions path, you can play the team that's finished second or third in some of the bigger leagues, and you're really up against it in terms of what resources you've got versus what your opponent has. So but wish them both well, and as you say, I think Glasgow City are probably looking at it thinking this is a real opportunity.
Just on Celtic then, Alison, 30 goals now I think we've tallied up for them. Is this an even more aggressive, exciting Fran Alonso's side do you think we'll see in this campaign?
It certainly seems to be. I think 10 players he had brought in and lost just as many. I think a few of us might have expected them to have teething problems just going into the opening games. I think very difficult when you're piecing together a side and lost so many key players like Natasha Flint had a huge role to play for Celtic across the latter stages of last term. Goalkeeper Pamela Sejonners has gone back. They lost keepers. They did retain like Caitlin Hayes and Kelly Clark. I think big experienced players, Chloe Craig, all in there. However, I think it can be very challenging to gel a team quickly, but the indications are that they've achieved that. I think you would say that the opening fixtures have been kind to them in terms of who they've played against so far. However, I think you would have to say it's been a very impressive return, and when we saw the latter stages of the previous campaign coming down at points to goal difference, it looked as though it could come to goal. I think what you're seeing in those performances is that mentality of every goal could count, so you don't take your foot off the pedal in games.
We would love another end like that, Fiona, but just for the teams such as Hearts, Aberdeen, even Partick Thistle are up at that end of the table just now. What's their ambitions going forward, would you say, this season?
I think at the start of the season, clubs look at the split now, and there's a bit of a first part of the season, absolutely we need to be in the top 6. I think clubs like Hearts, who actually really competed well against the top 3, particularly post-split last season, they'll probably be looking at how close can we get. Can we split the top 3 that's become a bit of a tradition over the last couple of seasons? And it doesn't look like they're a million miles away. They've already played one and just lost out by a goal. I think clubs like Hearts will have that ambition. Partick Thistle, I imagine, will have a similar ambition to get into the top 6 again, because that in itself was a huge achievement for them relative to the resource that they've got. And let's not forget, they came into the SWPL that season really, really late, not that long ago, so they've adapted incredibly well to the top league. And we almost take it for granted now that Partick Thistle are one of our top teams. And you only have to look at Montrose and the struggles they've had in the early part of the season to see that's not easy to adapt from coming up, but they've adapted so well when they came up before, and they've really established themselves as a tough team that nobody wants to play against them. They're really difficult to play against. So clubs will have their different ambitions. There'll be ones that just want to stay in the league. There'll be some that are thinking top 6 is our ambition this year, and that'll be the ones that were maybe just at the kind of middle of the table last year, and then there'll be those that are fighting out for the Championship and also Champions League, which keeps it interesting, because even if the title does sort of run away with someone, which I hope it doesn't, you've still got that second place, and it's really important that a club gets the Champions League for everything we've already spoken about.
Let's just have a look at the table then to see what those results have done. Alison, can you see those scorelines getting closer, or do you see the top 3 breaking away once again?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think Hearts and Partick Thistle will be really pleased with how they've started the season. I do think it's very difficult to split the top 3. I think they are probably just a level above everyone else just now with the quality that they have. There's 3 teams that are full of international players. I think they're probably just a level above, but Hearts have invested. I think they'll be delighted with how they've started, and Thistle had a big result at the weekend too, a big win. But I would expect that as the weeks go by, I think there'll be very, very little between Celtic and Rangers and Glasgow City. And of course, Celtic would have been delighted yesterday when that draw came through from Broadwood. They were the real winners from that outcome, because it gives them a wee opportunity just to take a bit of breathing space and just to open up the smallest of cushions.
Yeah, well, let's have a look at the fixtures coming up this weekend as well then. We've got Spartans will take on Aberdeen, Rangers will host Partick Thistle, Hamilton take on Dundee United, Motherwell face Montrose, Hibernian will face Celtic, and Glasgow City will face Hearts later on at Saturday night. Before you go, Fiona, if you would like to implement anything or see anything change within the league from your position, what would it be?
What's a good question? I think from my perspective, we're very much led by the clubs, and that's really important. When we set up the league, it was structured in such a way that on the board it's a majority of club representatives. So I'm in a fortunate position that I speak to the clubs every week anyway, as part of the natural course of my job, but through the board they sort of direct us, so we know what the clubs are looking for. And right now, investment's massive. Clubs right now, we want our league to be a sustainable professional league, but to do that we need to drive more and more investment into the clubs, and as the centre, as a league, that's something that we've tried to do through our broadcast partnerships, commercial partnerships. But if there's one thing I'd like to do, is to accelerate the trajectory of that and get to a place where what we distribute at the end of the season is far more significant. We're in a good place compared to even in that first year. I think tenfold was the increase in the distribution from the previous season, so we've made good progress, but if I could accelerate that and get to the point quicker where we're distributing more to clubs, that's something that I would be delighted to do.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us to the end of our show. Thanks from myself, from Alison, thanks to Fiona for joining us. We'll be back next week. We'll hope you can join us.